Mi novia y yo teníamos 14 y 17 años y ya nos queríamos casar. Ramón me dice, vete a Irlanda a estudiar, prácticamente porque él ya veía venir las cosas, ¿no? Yo ya le había planteado que me quería casar. Y como éramos muy jóvenes, dijo, bueno, pues debe haber alguna manera de sacarlo de esta idea, ¿no? Mis papás no querían que yo me casara. Llegando a la ciudad de Londres, en el viaje hacia Irlanda, ahí encontró mi papá una revista en la que indicaba la regata La Vuelta al Mundo por primera vez. Se interesó mucho mi papá y de ahí inmediatamente me preguntó, oye, ¿le damos la vuelta al mundo? Y le dije, por supuesto que sí, no hay problema.
I was very much enthused by Sir Francis Chichester because when he went around the world, he aimed at trying to beat the average time of the clipper ships out to Australia and back again. And therefore, the idea began to have something which wasn't only 1,000 miles or 600 miles, but something which could really test people. And I thought, let us start a new sport entirely and have a round-the-world yacht race.
As soon as this was announced, powerful sailing nations put together teams of their most outstanding naval officers. The most adventurous and competitive sailors in the world signed up for the race. Lasting about 9 months, this round-the-world regatta is the most prestigious trans-ocean yacht race there is. 30 years later, it would become the Volvo Ocean Race.
Que mi hijo Enrique me dijo, si tú vas a esa regata, yo voy también. Entonces fui y me inscribí en la regata y me preguntaron que cuál era, con qué barco iba a participar. Dije que no sabía, pero que estuvieran seguros que allí estaría cuando empezara la regata. Pues como yo tenía muy poca experiencia, recurrí a mis amigos y les dije que me recomendaran un barco para el propósito de dar la vuelta al mundo. Un amigo me llevó a ver muchos barcos y algunas fábricas.
Ramón searched the continent for the perfect boat, but didn't like anything he saw. While returning to Mexico, he read that a swan yacht had won a regatta from Bermuda to Newport, Rhode Island.
Y yo me fui solo a Finlandia, pero nadie hablaba ni inglés y menos español, ¿verdad? Fui a su oficina, entonces llegó el que era el que inauguró esa fábrica. ¿Qué es lo que usted anda buscando? Y ahora ando buscando un barco propio para la vuelta al mundo. Pues uno como el que ganó la regata. Ese no hay problema, pero ahorita estamos haciendo un barco excepcional, que es el 65 pies. Vamos a ir a la fábrica y va a ver Se están construyendo los primeros 4. Total, allí a medio hacer estaba el Sayula.
Yo que los vi trabajar haciendo el número 1, número 2 y número 3 de los Swan 65.
Total, me convencí. No, pues ya está. A ver, dígame cuánto vale el grande. Yo quiero el grande, el 65.
The Swan 65, a sturdy yacht, perfect in every detail, capable of sailing both short and long distances. A 2-masted ketch, the Swan 65 can hold up to 5 sails at the same time, picking up impressive power and speed. Now he had the perfect yacht, but he also needed the perfect crew. He only had 3 members: his son, Enrique, his trusted employee, Cantis, and his wife, Paquita.
Subida a la aventura porque iba mi hijo. No sabía lo que iba. No tenía idea.
He also enlisted his 2 nephews.
Es una idea muy atrevida dar la vuelta al mundo en un velero, participar en la primera regata alrededor del mundo.
Yo había pensado, vamos a dar la vuelta al mundo y vamos a participar en una regata. Eso era todo lo que yo pensaba en mi cabeza.
But it was not enough. He needed expert sailors to complete the crew.
I saw a huge yacht in Belgium harbor. I asked the harbor master, what sort of a boat is that? He said, this is a Mexican Swan 65, and they're going to sail the Whitbread round the world race. I said, it's not true, really? Yes, he said. Crazy people, of course, Mexicans. Yachting in that time was very nationalistic. They went for English boat or French boat. They couldn't use any foreigners. There was no Dutch boat in this race. Then I decided I want to sail this race. And I think it was not possible in that time to get together a Mexican crew for able to drive the boat to its limits. So I knocked on the boat and I said, here am I want to join you.
I was building the sails for the boat, and so I asked one of my friends, I said, what are these sails for? Big sails, a lot of them going to Finland. And he said, this crazy Mexican guy's gonna do the round the world race. You should call him up and go. And so I thought, that's not a bad idea. So I called up and said, I'm building your sails, I wanna go. He said, you're on.
The boat was put together, shall we say, through the mail. Everything was done through letters. So I found out who the organisers were and I wrote away to them. And that's how it started.
I joined the yacht not knowing anyone, and just in case things didn't happen, I had enough money in my pocket to go home from Cape Town, South Africa. That was going to be the first stop.
I got a call 3 weeks before the race, so I frantically took a leave of absence from my job. I didn't know anybody on the boat.
My name is Tarrant Dalrymple Smith, but everyone calls me Butch. When we did the race, I was 40 years younger. We were all young kids.
These people had no safety, no communication, nothing. And still they jumped on these kind of adventures. And even his wife jumped on that adventure, not really knowing what she was jumping into. I think it's fantastic. I think they're more adventurous than anyone else today because very few people are willing to live today without communication. If you ask people to leave their phones, they get frustrated.
When I first got to England, I was walking down the street, literally from the bus station, just a big old mustache, long hair, and this car comes by with a bunch of guys hanging out of it, screaming in Mexican, whatever they were screaming, I don't remember. And they go, screeching to a stop. They go, you must be Keith.
Yeah? Get in, we're going for dinner. I was 22, and all I thought about were all these places, you know, all the cool places I got to go. England, Cape Town, Sydney, and Rio, never been there, never really thought about the 45 days in between.
The race consisted of 4 legs. The first, from Portsmouth to Cape Town. The second, from Cape Town to Sydney. The third, from Sydney to Rio de Janeiro. And the fourth, from Rio de Janeiro to Portsmouth. 27,000 nautical miles, 50,000 kilometers.
They can die, they will meet storms, anything can happen, and they're going to sail all the way around the world, and one of them will win, but all of them will go through the same difficulties. There's no fake, there's no director who scripts the show. If you start to get scared, you should never do this race.
On the morning of the 7th of September 1973, the Sayula II was christened and blessed by 2 Irish priests that Ramón had sent for. Holy water was sprinkled on the yacht and crew. The launch was a spectacular event which involved not only Ramón's family and friends, but also the press and several race officials.
La Marina inglesa, que llevan cientos de años siendo pues, los amos de los mares, ¿sí?
Proponen la idea de lanzar esta regata, pero mi sentir es que la proponen con la idea, obviamente, de que ellos, con la certeza absoluta de que ellos la iban a ganar.
Lo que antes de la salida en Inglaterra, en los periódicos ingleses, pues nos hacían burla. Ponían a los mexicanos con los sombreros estos anchos y hacían caricaturas, dando vuelta alrededor del winche, del velero, sin saber qué hacer, haciéndonos bolas con la cuerda de las velas.
They sort of said, Mexican, what the hell are you doing in a race like that? That is nothing for you.
The famous journalist came up to me and he said, you know, what are you doing on a Mexican boat? Surely you can't expect to win. And I just said to him, I never start a race without intending to win it. And he sort of laughed and, yeah. He said, you know, how do you feel about safety? And I said, well, I thought that, in fact, if all the boats were accounted for by the end, it would be considered a success. I think the fact that people were likely to die on the race was understood.
Era muy convincente. Mi tío siempre fue una persona de pocas palabras, pero de muchas acciones, y un hombre muy determinado.
Before departing, Ramón asked his crew how they felt about the chances in the race.
Mi tío dice, sí, porque ninguno de ustedes ha dicho que nosotros, Sayula II, México, vamos a ganar esa regata. Y por ningún otro motivo estamos aquí reunidos. Por ningún otro motivo he comprado este velero y por ningún otro motivo quiero que alguno de ustedes se suba al velero. Si no es capaz de pensar con esa mentalidad, les pido que por favor, en vez de subirse, se queden en tierra, porque me van a estorbar.
Yachts from 7 nations are setting out on the world's longest ocean race. 7 months and 27,000 miles of hard sailing.
El día de la salida, que bueno, era impresionante. Muchos barcos, veleros y no veleros, por todos lados. Eso fue muy impresionante.
Penduic 6, hot favorite of the experts. Built with massive French government support, she's pioneering a ruthless new type of aluminium ocean racer with incredible strength and a keel made of the precious metal uranium. Eric Tabarly, the greatest name in French yachting, takes the tiller himself with so much at stake.
Eric Tabarly, c'est le premier coureur professionnel, je pense, de la planète. Faire fabriquer des bateaux extrêmement novateurs. Pour toute notre génération, ça a été une inspiration. C'est quelqu'un qui avait une vision, qui avait une passion.
Je crois qu'Eric Tabarly, ça a été le précurseur des skippers français. C'est celui qui a pour la première fois battu les Anglais. C'est pour ça qu'il a été connu notamment à la Transat anglaise. Je crois que c'était le grand frère des marins et je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de marins aujourd'hui doivent beaucoup à Eric Tabarly parce que c'est lui qui a fait découvrir la voile aux Français, donc découvrir la voile et passionner des jeunes gamins comme moi au départ.
Great Britain too, Che Blythe's superb new yacht, built of fiberglass foam sandwich, is the Scratch Boat, setting an enormous genoa that needs a keen lookout stationed in the bow.
But perhaps the most well-known personality was Sir Che Blythe, skipper of Great Britain II, with a crew of paratroopers. In 1968, with little experience, he took part in the controversial Sunday Times Golden Globe race. In 1971, he became the first man in history to go around the world westward, non-stop, solo.
When he started his career with British Steel and then with Great Britain too, it was I who went round to see a person called Union Jack Hayward, who is a multi-millionaire. I tried to get him to sponsor the race. He said, no, Anthony, I'm not going to sponsor the race, but I'm going to sponsor Che Blythe.
Che est un formidable homme, une volonté de faire passionnant.
My attitude towards the Whitbread Round the World Yacht Race was very much an attitude of winning.
The most well-organised by far was Adventure. They had worked their boat up for months and they were head and shoulders above any competitor.
Eran 800 personas que querían participar de la Marina Inglesa. Y después de un proceso de selección muy fuerte, lograron seleccionar a 40. Cada etapa, pues llegaban nuevos refuerzos, pues frescos, descansados, listos para la siguiente etapa. Estos, por ejemplo, son 3 ejemplos de a quién se enfrentaba mi tío Ramón y a quién se enfrentaba el Sayula, a quienes nos enfrentábamos, a marineros con muchísima experiencia.
19 yachts competed in the race, 6 from France, 5 from the UK, 3 from Italy, 2 from Poland, 1 from West Germany, 1 from South Africa, and the Sayula from Mexico. Each yacht carried the country's most experienced yachtsmen, as well as new young sailors who would become the future stars of yacht racing.
Tenía yo dos jóvenes capitanes de guardia, mi hijo Enrique, que tenía 18 años cuando arrancó la regata, y un americano experto en velas, que tenía 21.
When I first got to England, I didn't know what my job was going to be on the boat. I just figured I'd be sailing. But then Ramon said, you're going to be a watch captain as well as a sailmaker. And then I became the guy who, anytime anybody had a question about what to do, what sails to have up, anything like that, they'd call me.
I don't like to sail on the wind anyway. I like reaching, but I asked Keith how fast the boat would go on the wind, how fast it would go reaching, and how fast it would go running. And going straight there would be on the wind, and it would be the closest route. But reaching around the high around would be farther, but we would be going faster.
En lugar de ir en contra, pegado a África, en contra del viento y en contra de la corriente, ir con viento en popa, más cercano a Brasil.
We had several very experienced sailors. We had some people who were absolute novices, and I was somewhere in between.
Ramon asked me what I could do on board. So I said, well, I did 3 years of medicine at university. And he said, right, you're the medical officer.
a navigator and radio operator, and also I have a telegraph license, so I took weather reports so we knew where to go on the yacht.
Pancho and Roberto and Kike, they could sail a boat, but they were short of experience handling sails and all that sort of things, which is very important, of course. But they managed to pick up very, very quickly to drive the boat and to do sail handling. Within no time, they were really good yachtsmen.
El tripulante más joven de toda la tripulación del Sayula, de los 12, era yo, y también de todas las demás tripulaciones, o sea, los otros 18 veleros que compitieron, yo era el más joven, pero yo tuve pues esa oportunidad de empezar la regata a los 17 años.
Las funciones eran pues desde cambiar velas, timonear. El turno para timonear era de media hora cada uno de nosotros. Y pues obviamente todo lo que implica subir las velas, ajustarlas, estar atentos si el viento cambiaba o no, si la marea, si las corrientes cambiaban o no.
Realmente esto de que te den la responsabilidad de ser capitán de guardia a los 19 años, a mí y a Kit yo creo que nos sirvió mucho en la vida. ¿Por qué? Porque nos hizo tomar decisiones fuertes en ciertos momentos.
Every day is different, but the regular days that you're doing your watches, we had a system of 6-6 watches during the day and 4-4-4 during the night. But you get so used to it, to the system.
There was a wide variety of experience on board. There weren't a lot of prima donnas.
Pues mis funciones eran, al principio, pues como marinero, como todos, pero ya después me fui a la cocina.
Countries was doing the cooking with a lot of hot Mexican chilies. When I came back, you know, I wanted my food here also with chilies. I was so used to it then.
A mí no me deberían de decir Cantis, sino a mi papá, que trabajó él en la casa que tenía Mario Moreno Cantinflas en Acapulco. Él era el jardinero de ahí. Y yo iba a ayudarle en la cosa del jardín a mi papá. Y entonces los amigos que pasaban ahí por la calle me empezaron a decir, oye, es Cantinflas. Digo, no, yo no soy.
Except from Cantis the cook and Ray the navigator, I think everybody did more or less everything. Driving the boat, changing sails. We were all multifunctional on the boat.
El barco era un barco muy cómodo. Yo creo que era el barco más cómodo de toda la regata.
The bigger boats were often underfunded, and Ramón selected a boat that he could actually campaign properly. All the kit was top quality. We had the best sails, we had good winches.
He did everything first class. We were sailing in luxury.
He was assertive, but in a very low-key way. He had a wonderful style.
I think he got mad at me 2 times, and both times it had to do with the housekeeping. Like he always said, I like order. I like order. He got angry, but then 5 minutes later, he would ask me if I wanted a drink.
Most ocean race yachts are dry. You don't drink alcohol on the boat during a race. But we were allowed to drink when we came off watch 1 glass of red wine or a beer, which is very special. This was a good idea because you relax a little bit. 1 glass of wine is doing a lot, and you sleep well and so on.
Siempre comer bien. Siempre beber bien, un buen vino. Antes de cada comida, él preguntaba uno por uno de los tripulantes, ¿qué quieres de aperitivo? Y uno decía, pues yo quiero una cerveza. Y otro decía, pues yo quiero un tequila. Y otro decía, pues a mí me gustaría un vodka. Y mi tío decía, no te levantes, no te muevas, yo te lo traigo.
Es la etapa más larga, fueron 44 días de Portsmouth a Cape Town. Tienes que hacer una hermandad y un equipo con todos ellos.
tejía, bordaba, pues de todo. Era poco lo que había que hacer realmente. El lugar donde estábamos era muy pequeño realmente, pero aparte de eso como que no les gustaba mucho la bañada, entonces cuando se bañaban con la cubeta les ponía yo el desodorante.
As they crossed the horse latitude, the last portion of the trade winds blew itself out for the Sayula, and the wind fell to force 1. The horse latitudes are located about 30 degrees north and south of the equator, sometimes called the calms of Cancer or the calms of Capricorn. The horse latitudes are named after Spanish ships transporting horses to the West Indies. Boats would get trapped in these calm waters, prolonging the voyage and causing water shortages. The crew would be left with no choice but to throw horses and other livestock overboard to survive. With a broken mast, Eric Tabelet's Penduic 6 is to abandon course and go directly to Rio de Janeiro for repair. She receives a new mast from the French Navy by air, which will allow her to continue on her way. Bernie Hosking, a crew member of Che Blythe's Great Britain II, fell into the water, but fortunately the others managed to rescue him.
But on that occasion, you haven't got time to be frightened because you're the captain, you're the leader. So you've got to get on and organise the chaps, get the guys back on board.
A barometer measures atmospheric pressure. A sudden drop means a storm is coming.
Nos tocó una gran tormenta y ver las olas, pero ver las olas alrededor de 15 metros, pero ver las olas como cerros, pero de agua.
We were caught with a big squall, probably about 30 to 40 knots. We can usually see these winds, but we were just caught unawares with all our sail up, and that was very hairy getting it all down. Mizzen spinnakers cracking like bullwhips.
No sé nadar. Yo contaba los días para poderme bajar porque cada día le preguntaba yo al rey cuánto tiempo nos faltaba y yo los iba contando día a día. Pues, fueron 44 días muy pesados.
There were no sat-navs or GPSs at this time, and you had to use the sun and the stars. And Ray and the navigator on Adventure had one thing the other boats didn't. They could read Morse code at 22 words a minute and construct weather maps. And that was vital in the first leg. And as the results show, Adventure first, Sayula second.
Against all expectations, the Mexican boat was only 2 days behind the English Navy's Adventure, which proudly occupied first place in corrected time.
Y la enorme satisfacción de vernos en segundo lugar de la carrera, en segundo lugar en tiempo corregido, en Sudáfrica.
But, the fact that we were doing pretty well surprised me a little bit because the crew wasn't, okay, strike that one. I mean, we didn't have the best crew in the race. Cape Town was fun, and one of the good memories about Cape Town was we climbed Table Mountain, which is this flat mountain in Cape Town. To get down, we went down this ravine or gully, and it was all loose rocks, and we almost had to run down. Anybody that did that, they couldn't walk for 2 days because we hadn't walked anywhere for 45 days. So our legs were just like rubber. I laid in bed all day. That was a memory.
While the competitors repaired their boats for the second leg, Ramón faced a bigger challenge, keeping his family together aboard the Sayula.
Mi madre sufrió mucho durante la primera etapa. Sí, al llegar a Sudáfrica, mi mamá lo único que quería es regresarse a México. Ya realmente no quería saber nada de mar.
Ya no quería yo saber nada del barco. Nada. Se fue mi hija, la más grande, a recibirme allá a Sudáfrica. Hasta que llegué dije, adiós mundo, pero yo ya me voy a mi casa.
With his wife gone, Ramón now had to deal with his son, who had trouble adapting to the small quarters.
Y después de que tuve una pelea con otro tripulante, pues yo prácticamente le dije a mi papá, yo me bajo en Ciudad del Cabo.
Me dijo que él ya de Ciudad del Cabo se regresaba a México. Le dije que no era posible. Hazlo por tu patria, no lo hagas por el compromiso conmigo. Hazlo por México.
Mi abuelo materno, es decir, su padre, murió cuando la familia era todavía joven. Mi madre tenía 10 años, mi tío Ramón tenía, creo que alrededor de 14, 15 años. Y en ese momento, por lo tanto, la familia se queda totalmente abandonada en el aspecto económico porque mi abuelo era el que mantenía a la familia. Y viene la muerte de mi abuelo y se quedan pues sin qué comer. Siendo mi tío el varón más grande de la familia, le dice a mi abuela que era importante que se saliera a buscar trabajo.
Sí, mi papá desde muy chico, después de que muere su padre, se fue a la Ciudad de México y trabajó en una fábrica de jabón, de lo cual mi abuela platica que llegaba y veía que mi papá tenía por la lejía las manos todas ensangrentadas.
Y encuentra en la Ciudad de México la posibilidad de un trabajo de venta de productos para el hogar a comisión. Entonces empieza a vender vajillas, a vender lavadoras, a vender ollas, pero es una venta de puerta en puerta. De esta manera, él empieza a mandar un poco de dinero a la familia a Puebla para poder seguir manteniendo a mi abuela, a mi madre y a sus demás hermanos.
Mi tío es una persona muy emprendedora, muy emprendedora. Tío Ramón fue el creador de una empresa, la primera empresa exitosa en este país de cambaseo, de puerta en puerta. Y llegó a tener esa empresa más de 3,000 trabajadores.
Y también donde él aprende a gobernar, a dirigir, a diseñar estrategias.
Ramon's business would become the most important of its kind in Mexico. The crew said their final goodbyes before departing from Cape Town to Sydney. They were about to enter dangerous waters.
And a calm start as the fleet heads out for the wild southern sea.
Wild winds, wet weather, and cold temperatures plague this part of the ocean, known to sailors as the Roaring Forties.
I wouldn't sail through the Roaring Forties again for $1 million.
A los Roaring Forties, la parte de la tierra que es barrida por vientos muy poderosos.
Call them the Roaring Forties because the wind from the 40th parallel to the 50th parallel, that's the span of the Roaring Forties. And it's because all these depressions are moving across this area of ocean from west to east, generating enormous winds, like 30, 40 and 50 knot winds.
Y de verdad son los 40 rugientes porque el viento pasa por los mástiles y ruge. Así se oye el viento. Y al principio pues sí da temor. Bueno, a mí me daba mucho temor.
En donde las olas eran enormes, el viento era aterrador, era fuerte, era como dice el nombre, rugía el viento. Se hacía una cortina de agua a los laterales del velero que no te permitía ni siquiera poder ver bien más allá, fantástica, que a veces a mí me gustaba irme a la proa para poder contemplar desde ahí cómo el velero iba abriendo el mar, como si fuera una cuchilla que va partiendo un pastel y que lo parte en dos.
We were
sailing under spinnaker. I was steering at the time, and suddenly this southerly wind came in. It was really a tremendous wind, about 30 or 40 knots. And all I could do was just spin the boat around, and we just took off with this wind behind us. I called all the hands on deck, or somebody called all the hands on deck. And I remember Keith coming up and saying, "You're going very well. Why are you worried?" And I said, "Well, the trouble is, we're trying to go that way." We're going this way.
One thing that's certain about bad weather on the high seas is that you can't understand it until you've lived through it yourself. It can go on for hours or days without stopping. You can return to your bunk and snuggle down, hoping that when you wake up, the strong wind will have dropped and the water will be calm. But this doesn't always happen. The sinister creaking of the mast and the water splashing over the deck are two typical sounds which remind us that at any moment we may be called upon to go out there again.
We were doing a spinnaker change, and as part of that, when you release the old spinnaker, you have to pull it in by the sheet. Well, that was probably the scariest moment in the race for me, because I happened to be steering the boat. Now, Ramón was pulling in on that sheet, and the sail filled partially, so it pulled back quite substantially. If he would let go, he wasn't going to fall onto the boat.
I still hear his voice, "Men overboard," because I was the first guy on deck, and I found Ramón on the side of the boat, hanging on the sheet.
My brain was just going in circles trying to think about what I was going to do if he let go, because to turn a boat around with a spinnaker up is a very dangerous thing to do.
You cannot hold a man with wet clothes with the speed of the boat. And then we had the luck that the boat made a movement, and what pushed the wave pushed Ramón up. So at that time we could get him back on deck. So you remember this very well, yes.
Obviously, that was everyone's worst nightmare.
We got him back aboard. Thank God for that. You know, offshore sailing, the way we did it, you're fatigued. It's hard to get rest when you only have 4 hours off, for example, between some of the watches.
En alguna ocasión pensé que a lo mejor me podía morir, ¿sí? No me acuerdo, a los 3 o 4 días, cuando empezaron las tormentas fuertes, en serio, me empecé a marear mucho, empecé a devolver el estómago muy fuerte. Entonces todo lo que comía salía. Y bueno, obviamente empezó mi cuerpo a estar mucho más débil, pero no podía decirlo a nadie. ¿Por qué? Pues porque todo el mundo estaba en las mismas que yo.
You're almost continually scared for a long period where you're worried about things, you're frightened of gear failure, you're frightened of somebody falling over the side, you're frightened of all sorts of things. But those sort of things were a bit more normal in those days. Today, people are a little bit more safety conscious than we were then.
From the 14th to the 25th of November, 2,555 nautical miles were covered, an average of 232 miles per day. Strong gales of wind force 6 were felt on those days, but the Sayula II relentlessly stuck to her course. The days of the 20th and the 21st brought gentle and refreshing winds, and in the afternoon of the 25th, the radio announced,
All yachts. On the night of November 24th, the Trente-à-Trois export lost its coast skipper Dominic Guillet overboard. He was not recovered.
But the Roaring Forties were about to show the crew of the Sayula that their main challenge was not the human skill of their Whitbread competitors, but the forces of nature on the open sea. The Sayula II was moving forward at great speed on a high sea with breaking waves.
I was down below on the starboard side of the boat. Butch was on the port side. We were on a day off, and I was cleaning David Bowen's camera, which he'd loaned me nicely so I could take pictures. And there's a hatch right over the settee or the dinette, and it got black. Because there was a wave that came over and broke right over the top of the boat. And picked the boat up and threw it down and broke some windows.
Pues nos cayó la ola encima a Bob, Martin y a mí que íbamos en la cubierta. Bob sí vio la ola. Yo todavía me acuerdo de su rostro, que fue unos instantes solamente. Yo iba sentado, así como estoy ahorita. Bob iba a mi derecha timoneando. Y yo nada más vi su cara y era una cara de espanto. De espanto, porque Bob sí veía la ola que venía encima de nosotros. Y yo lo que recuerdo es...
I was thrown up into an upper bunk, and then the floorboards came up on top of me, and then the water came in. And Butch fell down there, and he started throwing the floorboards off of me so I could get out. That's a pretty vivid memory. I thought I was going to drown.
Sentir, después de que vi la cara de Bob, sentir un golpe fuertísimo en la espalda del agua y botarme al vacío, botarme. Y a la hora que me botó y todo mojado, sentí el jalón de mi cinturón de seguridad, que gracias a Dios lo llevábamos puesto los dos. Y el barco lo que hizo fue, el mástil se metió al agua.
I could hear this rush of water, and I thought, good Lord, the mast has broken and has punched a hole in the hull. But I looked up and there it was. The mast was intact.
Y regresó por la enorme quilla. Pero a la hora de regresar, Bob y yo por instinto, yo creo que de sobrevivencia, regresamos. Bob regresó al timón y se paró así. Y yo regresé a sentarme en el mismo lugar donde estaba.
Pues nos volteó la ola y pensábamos que nos íbamos a hundir. Se metió demasiada agua al barco. Se rompieron unas escotillas, se metió mucha agua, mucha agua.
And our bilge pumps didn't work because they were full of balloons from the Thanksgiving party the Mexicans gave us. And Butch commented as we were throwing buckets of water out the boat, he said, there's no better bilge pump than a frightened man with a bucket.
And I can remember everyone working their soul cases out, getting the water out of the boat.
But it was very cold. It was Southern Ocean. After 6-7 hours, I became stiff all over my body. I couldn't move anymore.
One doesn't normally get knocked off a sailboat and still be recovered and continue on sailing. When you're in the worst of the conditions, you think to yourself, is this really what I want to do, and is this worth it?
A mí me cayó la botavara del mástil de mesana. El mástil de mesana es el mástil que va atrás. Me cayó la botavara en una rodilla, entonces me dolía muchísimo la rodilla. Y después fue que me di cuenta que mi cinturón, el gancho de seguridad se había abierto. Entonces, en lugar de quedar así, con el impacto tan fuerte se abrió. Entonces, bueno, estoy vivo pues de milagro. ¿Sí?
Y cuando don Ramón iba a arrancar el motor, dijo, crucen los dedos todos para que arranque el barco, porque si no arranca ya nos amolamos, nos tenemos que salir de la regata, porque pues ya sin motor no hacemos nada, porque con eso cargábamos las baterías del barco para tener luces en la noche, para navegar. Pero el motor encendió y todo fue avante.
We were fully instrumented. Of course, most of that went away after the capsize. So for half of leg 2 getting up to Sydney, Australia, we didn't have any boat instruments.
Perdimos el radio, perdimos toda la posición, nos daban por perdidos.
When they could not be contacted by radio, the crew were given up for lost. They were presumed dead.
After we determined that we weren't going to sink, Butch and I had the evening watch And we saw the most spectacular display of the Australis aurora. We call them northern lights in the northern hemisphere, but the southern lights. He had never seen them in his life, and of course I hadn't either. He almost went down and woke everybody up on the boat to have them come up and look.
The direct route to the finishing line was across the Bass Strait, which separates Tasmania from mainland Australia. There are lots of cargo ships and ferries in this area, so Ray, using only a torch and his knowledge of Morse code, informed a merchant ship that she could advise the Australian Navy that they were alive and heading to Sydney.
I know that they did a capsize in the Southern Ocean, and the radio was broken, I think, in that capsize and everything. So they arrived 2 weeks later, and nobody knew that they had done this. And then they had to tell this story, you know, but fascinating. And today we will pick that story up, you know, in the second it happens, so we will have it on cameras.
And through another stroke of just monumental luck, we got a following wind, which was so unusual for that part of the world.
Because of this following wind, the Sayula traveled at great speeds. Due to their damaged radio, they had no idea where they stood in the race.
When we got to Sydney, we found out that we were in first place in the race, and that put Ramón in a very difficult position because after the capsize, I remember him saying we could never continue on the race.
The yachts arrived in the port of Sydney, all suffering tremendous adversity and damage in the second leg. As Ramón contemplated retiring from the race, he called home to his wife.
Y le dije a mi mujer, pues fíjate que, pues dando un pretexto de negocios o de familia, me retiro de la regata al barco. Me dijo, bueno, pues tú te puedes retirar, pero yo me divorcio de ti si dejas la regata. O sea, me contestó, igual como yo le contesté a Enrique, primero era el prestigio de México y no otra cosa.
And the news that he was in first place overall in the race, I think, tipped the scales so that he felt he had no real choice but to continue on in the race. We lost considerable gear, we broke some rigging, and he was faced with a monumental job of trying to get the boat back into sailing condition.
The crew worked hard and got the Sayula repaired in time to start the next leg. The Adventure, true to her relay strategy, changed her crew once again. New men, new strength to carry on. Che Blythe and Eric Tabalay also finished their repairs in time and continued to push for the lead. The third leg of the race began with these top boats neck and neck, racing towards Rio. The route from Sydney to Rio de Janeiro would pass by Cape Horn, the historical trading route of the Southern Sea, where clipper ships once made use of the strong yet dangerous westerly winds for greater travel efficiency. For this leg, Ramón chose what was considered the long route, staying in the northern latitudes, then swinging down around Cape Horn.
En lugar de acercarse más rumbo al polo, porque la distancia se acorta, conservar una distancia mayor. ¿Para qué? Para no encontrarse icebergs.
And to hit an iceberg in a sailboat would be catastrophic. It's not so bad if you can see the iceberg, but they have things that they call growlers. which is a large mass of ice that's just barely submerged. So you can't really see it, especially with any wave action. We were fortunate enough not to see any ice on the whole race, except for snow, which fell on the deck many times.
Strong winds, dangerous currents, and icebergs notoriously turn the waters around Cape Horn into a sailor's graveyard. Countless ships and sailors throughout time have been lost in the heavy conditions. Not all the racers were as fortunate as Sayula. The Adventure chose the most direct route through the treacherous Southern Ocean.
Well, the sea is simply cruel and you can't know what it's going to do. So sad with the loss of life, but you have to expect it in this sport. You can't get away from it.
Calling all boats. We have tragic news. We have lost 2 other fine sailors. Paul Waterhouse of the Toranga and Bernie Hoskins of the Great Britain II. Let us take a moment of silence to salute these fine young men.
The Whitbread favourite, Eric Taboulé, was forced to retire his yacht after the Penduic 6 broke its second mast of the race. There wasn't enough time for the French Navy to send a new one again by air.
Il n'a malheureusement pas eu de réussite avec Penduic 6, avec 2 dématages sur la course, ça aide pas. Et alors que je pense que c'était l'équipage et le bateau le mieux préparé et de loin pour gagner la course.
Thanks to Ramon's navigation and planning, Sayula stayed in the higher latitudes and avoided disaster in its approach to Cape Horn. This difficult feat christened even the most inexperienced crew members of Sayula II as true sailors. Ramón, now a true captain.
Poder llegar a Cabo de Hornos es algo muy emocionante porque pues es donde se juntan el Océano Pacífico y el Atlántico. Finalmente convergen en ese punto que está entre la Patagonia y Antártida.
When you round the Horn, you become part of an exclusive club of sailors who've taken on the ocean's most extreme conditions. Today, more people climb Mount Everest than sail around Cape Horn.
If you want to be a really sailor, you have to pass at least once in your life to Cape Horn.
Yeah, they have a special organization for anyone who sailed around Cape Horn. That I rounded Cape Horn, I'm a Cape Horner.
La satisfacción de ver el Cabo de Hornos y de estar ahí un barco de la Armada inglesa, creo, tocándonos algunas piezas de mariachi mexicano y oyéndolo, ¿sí?
After rounding Cape Horn, the waters calmed and tropical weather set in.
Y obviamente el llegar a Río de Janeiro, el sentir la calidez latina, el sentir la calidez, el recibimiento enorme de los brasileños para nosotros. ¿Sí? Éramos el único barco de América Latina. Bueno, éramos el único barco de toda América. Y sentir el cariño, sentir esta calidez de la cual somos partícipes los latinos. Y bueno, en Río nos tocó estar en el carnaval de Río, una experiencia también muy agradable.
I saw this, what I looked to be an American woman. And I said, "Are you American?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, what are you doing here?" She goes, "Oh, I fly for X Airlines." And I said, "Well, would you like to go sailing? We're a whole bunch of sailors here sailing around the world." And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, all right. Come on down to the Rio de Janeiro, Yacht Club de Rio de Janeiro. Come on down at noon and bring your friends." And she said, "Okay." The next day at noon, she was there with 4 of her friends. We went sailing, we did all the things you do. The girls wound up staying on the boat with us. One day, the one that I was with said, "Well, we have to go home tomorrow, back to New York." I said, "Oh, too bad." She said, "Well, can I tell the next crew that's coming down about this?" And I said, "Yes, please." So we had stewardesses rotating around from New York. The last batch of girls, they wanted to go to Ipanema Beach. We said, "Well, let's go to Ipanema." We decided to go swimming, so we took all our clothes off and went swimming. We're all swimming around out there, right off the beach, having a great old time. And I looked up on the beach, and there were some, you call them federales here. I don't know what they're called in Brazil, but they were with their machine guns picking up the girls' panties. So I went up there and I said to the guys, "What's going on?" And they said, "No nude swimming on the beach." So they let us all have our clothes and they put us in jail. One of the brighter bulbs in the group said, "Why don't we just put all of our money in somebody's hand and knock on the door and offer it to him?" So we put together, whatever money we had, which wasn't a whole lot, knocked on the door, opened the door, handed the guy the money, and he goes, "Okay, off you go." And then we had to walk home.
Nesta grande corrida, Fórmula 1 de veleiros, os competidores começam a velejar aqui e só termina a corrida lá no Reino Unido. O barco Advent da Grã-Bretanha sai em primeiro lugar, com os mexicanos logo atrás em segundo.
Carlín e a tripulação do Sayula foram uma inspiração, eu acho, para a equipe do Brasil 1. Bom, na época da primeira regata eu tinha 13 anos. A família sempre foi bastante ligada à vela e ao mar, né? Então a gente acompanhou bastante a passagem dos barcos pelo Rio de Janeiro. Então essas imagens ficaram muito gravadas assim na minha memória.
On the 19th of March, Ramón had one objective in mind: to catch up with the Adventure, wherever she might be. Keith suggested tacking eastward, but other members of the crew thought this was a losing battle, and the best thing would be to go northward and stay in the path of the Great Circle. But the final decision was always made by Ramón, and this time he gambled on Keith. The Sayula II headed eastwards.
Ramón always had the last word, which I think is a very good thing. And he did this on a very pleasant way. It was a pleasure to be on that boat.
We were alone, obviously, for most of the race, so it was our own motivation that kept the boat going at top speed. I think also we had a reputation of being a crew that enjoyed their pleasures and were very relaxed. But we were still pushing the boat quite hard.
But the non-stop passage through the strong waves of the Atlantic, known as the Northeast Trades, left its mark on the Swan.
El mástil mayor, junto con el stay, se empezó a romper. Se empezó a deshacer los hilitos de acero. Entonces no podíamos utilizar la vela adecuada, porque si utilizábamos esa vela muy grande, el mástil corría el peligro de romperse.
The crew members found themselves facing a dilemma. If they sailed at full force, the mast could end up unusable, and they would not only lose the leg, but the whole race. On the other hand, if they sailed too carefully, they would lose any advantage over the adventure. After surviving storms and huge waves and even falling overboard, Ramón Carlín's heart was set on one thing only.
I remember that in 1 3-day period, we changed sails or reefed 150 times. So that means that we were changing the sails about once every half hour over 3 days. So we were pushing quite hard.
Entonces, todos los días me acuerdo que se subía Canti hasta arriba del mástil a hacer la reparación correspondiente. Pero obvio, era una reparación solamente.
El estalla de proa detiene al mástil y estaba a punto de caer. Podíamos perderlo todo.
No me acuerdo, creo que fueron 2 o 3 días en la angustia de ir con una vela menor, obviamente ir a una velocidad menor, pero ir caminando.
We had no radio communication because our radios hadn't been tuned properly. And as we came up to the finish line, Ramón could see the tension building, and he went round to everybody and he said, I am very pleased with all the work you have done, so no matter where we come, I will be pleased.
Desde empezar a ver el canal entre Portsmouth y la isla de White, empezar a ver algunos helicópteros y de repente empezar a ver muchas embarcaciones chiquitas, grandes, que se nos acercaban así.
We finished on Easter Sunday, 1974 at 4 o'clock tea time.
I couldn't have believed what sort of a finish we were going to have. Crossed the finishing line, dropped the sails, and I looked up, and there must have been 3,000 or 4,000 people. I'd never seen such a crowd before.
Al cruzar la meta de un barco, no me acuerdo de cuál, nos aventaron una caja de botellas de champán y cada quien cogió su botella. Bueno, y bueno, el día que llegamos, una alegría inmensa, pero inmensa, así, inmensa. Había muchas personas en el muelle esperándonos. Entre ellas estaba mi mamá, ¿no?
En la vida hubiéramos imaginado lo que íbamos a vivir y mucho menos haber ganado esta carrera.
This victory made Ramón Carlín the winner of the first Whitbread Round the World race and the first Mexican to win a multi-staged international sporting cup.
The personality is what makes these people special. I think the best people in this sport, in this event, they care about who you are, not where you come from. And they're very strong on that. You know, they look through all the fancy clothes and the language and the countries and the backgrounds and the money. They look at who you are because they know that's what's going to matter.
Nos abrieron el puente de Londres en el Támesis para que pasara el Sayula, para que el Sayula se pudiera quedar a un lado de la Torre de Londres para estar listos para la ceremonia de premiación que fue en la casa del alcalde de Londres por el príncipe Felipe.
And Prince Philip was there to present the prize. It was a great party. They were all dressed up with their Mexican hats. It was fantastic. It was just great.
La regata se ganó por él, por mi tío Ramón, indudablemente. Es una persona que sabe muy bien cómo hacer las cosas y que tiene la capacidad de que los demás lo sigamos para obtener el objetivo que él sea trazados. Creo que ese es mi tío Ramón.
What he lacked from experience, he more than made up. Tireless work and his tireless planning. He made the crew an extension of his family, and he won over our trust, our loyalty, and I believe our love.
He managed straight from the beginning to get this crew together, to get the right boat. But we sail all the way around the world with the same really sailing crew, and this is okay.
La gente reconoce a Ramón Carlín, mi padre, como un buen capitán y un buen marinero, aunque no hubiera tenido la experiencia grande.
He's just a wonderful person, kind and generous with the people on the boat, and very well organized. And that's why we won. And I just love him. I hate to see that he's 90.
After the prize giving, when everyone had to leave and go their separate ways, I couldn't even face actually having to say goodbye to people. It was all very difficult because we'd lived together and we'd lived through so much.
Pues pensábamos que ya no la íbamos a hacer. Esa carrera nada más una sola vez se hace.
That was the high adventure of my life, and I'm just so thrilled to have been able to do it.
Inédito el que un mexicano hubiera ganado las regatas, ¿no?
Ya, cabrón, me vas a llorar otra vez.
Y el que tenga duda, hasta si quiere se lo firmo ante notario, de que nosotros vamos a ganar esta regata.
Saber nadar porque de otros barcos que se cayeron al agua, que son marineros profesionales prácticamente, y se ahogaban porque no había manera de que salieran.
I can tell you the most dangerous part of the whole trip was taking a taxi across downtown Rio de Janeiro.
And even when I was cleaning toilets on merchant ships, I liked it better than being a school teacher.
To finish first, you first must finish.
I feel like quitting at every port.
I haven't lived on land since 1973. I don't feel the need to live on land.
The Sayula crew and other crews. Well, the difference was that we won the Whitbread Round the World race.
Despuésito de la regata, pues lo primero que hice fue ir a comer una comidita mexicana y pues buscar a la novia que había dejado en México.
¿A quién se le ocurre participar en una regata alrededor del mundo?
Tenía ansias de ti, de abrazarte y besarte, mi bien, de sentirte muy cerca de mí. Tenía ansias de ti, tenía ansias de ti, de sentir tus caricias de amor, de saber si me quieres o no. Tenía ansias de ti. Ni un solo instante, estoy seguro, te has acordado de mí. No sé qué diera